What? Yeah.
You got one tire. I've got three more strokes. One tire so if you need to get by for a while, I can agree with that. Same size as you. It was flat when I got in the car, I didn't notice it. So I got to the bottom of the hill, and I'm like, what is that? And so I had 4 all seasons that came with it, and I haven't had a car that long, but they told me it was all-wheel drive. So,
yeah. I think this is great. I'm watching it. This is just sort of the watching it as about
that's no tire.
New people, yeah. Just so you know, there's probably about a minute delay. Everyone who's watching some numbers. I think you can. No. I think
Test 1, 2.
No, what could be like my bio or something?
Yeah.
Chris enjoys alpine skiing. Thank you all for coming. This is a great turnout, much more than I expected. We're a lot
Bruce,
of my.
I need you on mic for the stream.
That was the first thing I was going to say. Is that they need me on mic for the stream. And so when you all ask questions or make a point, I'll give you the mic too. And Carrie.
Carry something or give options.
Let's go with that. All right, so only one person can talk at a time. We're trying to do this in my household as well. You have to hold something like there's a conch shell, and if you're not holding it, you're not supposed to be talking. So real quick, I will. A lot of my fellow committee members are here. Maria Lascaris is here, and Christian Donahue. What exactly is the committee about? Well, you remember at one of the faculty meetings, Phil talked about the opportunity. Two different, one question and one opportunity. One question is, what can we do to better create continuity for the students in their residential experience? Because those of you who have talked to the students or actually attended Dartmouth know, or have students who have children, relatives who've attended, you know that there's this constant, a very large number of moves in a given academic year for the average student, and so they're bopping around between different housing clusters and different housing situations. And so, how do we maybe create some more continuity? Maybe does it make sense to have for them to have a home base, that when they come back from their FSP, they come back to that home base. When they come back from when they come back as juniors, that they have at least have the option to be in the same spot as when they were a sophomore. That's one of the questions. And the other more practical matter is, could we do anything that would better utilize the buildings on campus, the facilities? And I have to say that Dartmouth, having been in a couple of other places in my life, I do get outside of Hanover now and then. I think we're pretty good at making good use of the facilities, but the question is, could it be better? And in particular, Phil pointed to a series of numbers, pointing out that we have. I'm going to blow this now, but Inga can correct me. I think that like in this fall, I'm going to say there's something like 4,000 students who are on, 3,600 of which are housed in college housing, and then in the winter that drops by 300 to 400. So there's a gap. So there are basically empty. Fall is way overcrowded with lots of doubles being tripled up, and then winter is undercrowded with the students, with it being a little spooky in some corners of some dorms. And so and then of course summer is a really interesting kettle of fish, because we don't have that many Dartmouth students who are on, but we've got lots of sports camps going on and such. And so the dorms actually are somewhat full, even though they're not necessarily filled with Dartmouth students. So that's the question is, is there an opportunity? So summer, maybe, certainly there's the possibility of having more Dartmouth undergraduates here in the summer, and how do we incent them or require them to do that? There's the possibility of incenting more Dartmouth students to be on in the winter and off in the fall, and is that physically possible? What would be the ways to do that? So that is the charge. And I don't think we've already got a laundry list of ideas that we came up with. We're not pushing for any one particular thing. I don't think you could probably guess at a couple of them. Rather than me run through that, I think maybe we should just open it up to suggestions you might have or concerns. It can be a suggestion about a way that might work to do it, or it could be a concern like, well, it'd be ridiculous if you did X. With that, so I think that's enough of. If other committee members think I've left something out, please tell me. And Christiane and I will do our best to jot down what you say, but the whole thing's being taped, so. Keep that in mind when formulating questions, but also I'll use that as we'll do a transcript. We'll do a transcript later. So with that, let me just hear what's on people's minds. Oh, and tell us who you are.
Sure. My name is Carrie Heckman. I'm a member of the class of 1976, as well as privileged to teach in the philosophy and computer science departments. And I suspect I've known the Dartmouth Plan as long, if not longer, than anybody in this room, and I've been a pretty devout hater of it for 42 years. So I'm really happy you're finally willing to talk about it. That actually, for some reason, has been a issue that has not been interested in being talked about, or has been verboten, I guess, to talk about for a while. And I think it's really important that we not be afraid to re-examine our basic principles and practices and keep checking to see if they're working. I know that during the Student Life Initiative about 15 years ago, faculty, alumni, and students all complained that the Dartmouth Plan was the elephant in the room, that was their term actually, that had to be reviewed if you're talking about improving academic and social life at the college. So you really can't miss it. You can't leave it out of the equation if that's what you're trying to do. Let me first make clear the Dartmouth Plan is not the quarter system. Some people may think it is, but it's not. I had a trustee try to tell me that it was, and that's wrong. The quarter system existed at Dartmouth about 10 years before the Dartmouth Plan. It's not the summer term. We had a summer term before the Dartmouth Plan. It was not created for any educational or other reason except as an expedient, so it does not have an academic premise to it. It is not about off-campus studies. We had those before and can have those after. Other schools have them. It's not about coeducation. Certainly was the expedient for getting coeducation here, but guys, it's been 40 years. Get a clue. We're past that. In short, nothing at Dartmouth, in my opinion, more disrupts the faculty and undergraduate cohesiveness than the Dartmouth plan. And the negatives of this are far and outweigh the positives, and I could detail that, but I'm sure we're short of time. It also should make you wonder. You should be pausing. How come no other school in the United States, no other college or university has adopted this piece of garbage? And in fact, other schools have looked. Yale came here and examined it and said, "You got to be kidding me. We wouldn't do this. This is stupid." And it should make also, I guess to me, especially as one who teaches in philosophy, the single worst thing about the Dartmouth plan for me is that it's philosophically so selfish, which makes sense for the 70s. Doesn't make sense for, I think, where we are right now. The message of the Dartmouth plan is that your Dartmouth experience is about me, 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 me. What am I doing? When am I doing it? What am I doing? What I'm doing is. That's the message we're giving our students. Me, 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 me. And we wonder why in the classroom we get that message. Well, we're helping reinforce that by having this silly Dartmouth plan thing. There's not a good balance between the me and the us, and that's what ruins campus organizations, puts a burden on the buildings that is they're crushing from this burden that this plan is imposing on them, complicates course sequencing, requires faculty teaching in the summer, which fewer are doing, so we're getting more visitors and adjuncts during the summer, destroying that part, disrupts student relationships, and for reasons I haven't figured out, David McLaughlin said it was economically unattractive, and I haven't quite figured out what he meant by that. He's not around to tell me, so maybe that's something else you should look at, is whether it really is economically a good idea anymore, but he seemed pretty convinced, he was pretty good at economics, that it was economically unattractive. So with that, I'll let somebody else say something nice, I guess.
So just to summarize, don't tell a philosopher that the D plan and the quarter system are the same thing. And people, 70s, those of you who grew up in the 70s, selfish. I'm from the 80s, we're humanitarians, and we love people. That was the era of love thy neighbor. So no, thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that. And actually, if you have those comments written, I noticed you were out. I would definitely love to take those. Can you? That would be terrific. Can you clarify for us then the difference between the D plan and the quarter system? Specifically, are you saying that because we require the summer term, which then forces and almost forces students to be off a different term, is that the part of the D plan?
No, I've heard people claim the D plan has to do with having quarters instead of semesters. And there's a whole different argument that's existed in the college for 50 years, about maybe 60 years, about the advantages of shorter terms versus longer terms. Those of us in classes that assign papers tend to chafe at the idea that it's hard to assign a very long paper. No, in the writing program, that's often a conversation that you can't assign very long writing because by the time the students get here and kind of get comfortable, it's already over. And so you can't really do more than about a 10-page paper. So realistically, you can't assign a 30-page paper. Actually, I taught another institution. They overlapped the deadline, so you could have the paper was due in the next quarter. But that's kind of a weird way of doing things too. So any event, we couldn't do that because of the Dartmouth plan. So the quarter system, to how long the academic quarter calendar is one issue. The Dartmouth plan was this idea of treating us like we were computers, no offense, gentlemen, and that we would timeshare the memory. We would be swapping in and out in order to find a way to put 4,000 people into a campus made for 3,200 people. And that's because there's a property tax on dorms and dining halls in New Hampshire, probably the only state in the country that does that. There was a proposal to put a coordinate campus over in Norwich so you could walk over a bridge and avoid the tax. But correctly, I think it was decided that was just too divisive on a geographical level. And so the faculty voted that down. And so John Kennedy said, okay, then I guess we'll do this other thing. And I actually had the good fortune of knowing Charlie Wood, the chair of the Committee on Year-Round Operation. And we had long conversations because he knew about my deep hatred. And he explained to me it basically was forced down their throats because of the need for finding a way to squeeze 4,200 students into a campus of theirs. So that's all the Dartmouth plan is, the shuffling around of people, treating them as if they were fungible. One of the things I pointed out to President Hanlon is that just because you even out the numbers doesn't even out the people. You don't get cohesiveness because you happen to have 700 people on campus, or whatever the number is every term. They're different people. And so you still have disruption of relationships. You still can't run an organization. You still can't do things. So that's another sort of faith. There's some people very closely associated with coeducation. Yes, made it possible, but it's not coeducation. We can easily have. Princeton does it. In fact, Princeton works very hard to prevent the Dartmouth plan. Their president told the president of Stanford they actually orchestrate their thesis requirement to make sure students don't leave. And guess what? Their alumni giving rate went from 50% to 75%. And guess what? Ours went from 75% to 50%.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Pallison, and I'm a 14 here, and I can't really provide any insight on the professors' perspectives of the D plan, but as a student, I think that the D plan has probably been the best part of my Dartmouth experience. Since my time at Dartmouth, I've been able to study and work in 5 countries on 3 continents, and that's something that I don't think I could have been able to do at another school that doesn't have the D plan and the quarter system, and given me the ability to leave during winter term, for instance. I think that these experiences have also allowed me to bring a lot back to the campus and to get involved in different student organizations and share my experiences and try to promote more global citizenship. So that's my perspective. I think that the D plan is a really great thing, and I think that it allows a lot of students to have really unique experiences.
Well, thank you, Jocelyn. That's terrific. And if there are other students in the room, we'd love to hear from you as well. And both of these, this probably has occurred to everyone here, but both what Carrie and Jocelyn said could both be true simultaneously. Or at least I don't want to debate that right now, but in my mind, they certainly could be. So anyway, go ahead.
Hi, Steve Silver from the Office of Pluralism and Leadership. I would add a couple of thoughts. I think the D plan is one of the reasons why our Greek system is so strong and healthy, because with students constantly coming and going from this campus, changing residence halls several times a year in many cases, the Greek system says, join us and you'll always have a home. You'll always have you'll have a permanent place to return, versus when you're off and running on 3 or 4 continents. And I think it's exciting that you can get those kinds of study abroad experiences, but I wonder if there isn't a way to modify the D plan. Perhaps we should talk a little bit about the sophomore summer requirement. I can speak from personal experience as to what that does. Wreaks havoc for international students on this campus, and I hope my friend Marcia Calloway, who's here, would agree with that, or she can maybe share some information on that too without putting you on the spot, which I just did, sorry. But there are some real challenges for international students. Beyond that, from what I've heard from students who across the board, there are challenges in terms of curricula offerings, that they don't have the same level of choice and breadth of opportunities to study during the sophomore summer. So maybe that's an element of the Dartmouth plan that we could look at closely. Thank you.
Steve, while you've still got the mic, what did you have in mind? Do you have something in mind for because the 2 obvious things one could do is require more summers of students, or not required of any student, or maybe you have some third thing. Do you have something in mind?
Yeah, well, and I've done 0% of the research on this that I know that you folks are working on, but perhaps an elimination of that sophomore summer requirement, so that we become perhaps, and maybe there we have the Stanford model to look at. I know they're on a quarter system. I truly have no idea as to how successful or not that system is at Stanford, but it might be worth exploring. So.
I'm Tom Corman. I'm chair of the computer science department, and I'll just mention something that I brought up at the faculty meeting when President Hanlon discussed trying to smooth out the enrollment patterns across terms. Before that, I just want to say I agree with everything Carrie said. I know. So in our department, we offer 1 course over the summer. It's the computer architecture course. We offer it every summer, and it's been, I think, at least a decade, if not longer, since a tenure-track faculty member staffed the course. We're always either getting graduate students who, of course, we know don't teach at Dartmouth to teach it, or visitors to teach the course. And why is this? Because none of the computer science faculty want to teach over the summer. So if we're talking about increasing the number of students here for the summer, as President Hanlon has suggested, I don't know how I'm going to get even more courses in computer science staffed unless it's by visitors or graduate students or adjuncts or other than the tenure track faculty. There might be ways that we could have that happen if it could be incentivized, that you get additional teaching credit for teaching over the summer. There's also a possibility of block scheduling, which was mentioned by Kathy Cottingham at the faculty meeting, where instead of students taking 3 courses all at the same time, you take one course, then another course, then another course. And faculty might be willing to sign on for teaching 3.5 weeks at a time rather than 9 weeks. But in general, I think there's going to be a real problem trying to get additional summer courses staffed, as President Hanlon had suggested. And I brought this up at the faculty meeting, and he said that he hoped that faculty would understand that it's an institutional priority. I think for a lot of faculty, it goes against their family priority of actually spending summer with their families. And I don't know how it's going to shake out, but I have a feeling it's not going to work out very well unless we provide additional incentive for teaching over the summer if we're going to be increasing the number of summer courses.
Hi, I'm Hope Rennie. I'm a class of 90 alum and a current staff member. I think the D plan is one of our great assets, a unique asset of Dartmouth. I think it is amazing how it allows people to have opportunities they would not otherwise have. As the student was mentioning, I also had a chance to have internships and work opportunities during terms when I wasn't competing with all the other college students in the United States for those opportunities, which is the summer term. So I was able to get internships in Boston in the winter or the spring term that I otherwise would not have had that were crucial to my education. Also, in terms of study abroad, the ability to travel after my FSP during a winter term or a fall term instead of during the summer term also gave me opportunities that otherwise I would not have had. So I found it to be really wonderful to have the D plan in terms of being able to design your college education according to a more flexible schedule. It does have social disadvantages, and I'm realizing in this conversation the extent to which that does strengthen the fraternity sorority system. I ended up joining a co-ed house in part to have that place you came back to, the place you stored your stuff, you know, with it not having to shuttle around 6 million different dormitories. So maybe we need to mitigate that downside by having something like dormitory clusters that you're a part of, like the houses at Princeton or something. I think that's an excellent suggestion. On the other hand, I'm not really sure how we can make the D plan even out. There are people who want to schedule things to avoid being in Dartmouth in the winter because they hate cold climates or because they're championship skiers. And there's people who want to schedule things to have their summers free. So one might hope that those numbers of people would balance out, but I have no way of knowing whether that's the case.
You know, one of the suggestions that we've been kicking around in our meetings was that if there are particularly attractive FSPs that happen during the fall, could those be expanded, or could FSPs be moved to the fall? I mean, if anybody here is involved, has a major FSP program in their department, or you know, maybe you could comment on that, and you know, whether are there expansion opportunities, can FSPs be moved around terms to cause some movement of the residents? Yeah, I don't know. So first of all, somebody needs to name a popular FSP that takes place in the fall in order for me to have a good example. So what would be one that people go on during the fall? The government one is the government one at London School of Economics. So if they have, assuming they have more applicants than they have slots, if they're currently taking 30, could they take 45? I don't know. I mean, that would be the thought, and we'd have to do this 20 times over in order to have a really significant effect. But that's a strategy that one might use.
I'm Marcia Calloway from the OVIS office, and I just wanted to address the international component a little bit. For the sophomore summer, I think the problem is it's kind of an attractive nuisance for the undergraduate international students because everybody else is doing that, and so they feel that they have to. And that messes up their visa because they have to be on for so many terms before they get a leave term. And then they want to do other things like take advantage of internships and things, which typically people want to do just because it's the time of competition, the summer of their junior year. So I think apart from that, the reality today is that most people want some sort of a study abroad experience, and they also want flexibility. It's the way the world has moved, so students at all schools want to do that sort of thing, and I think that the flexibility that we have is both a good and a bad thing. But what I've been doing just recently is working on a program for the spring immigration workshop that's put on by our region. And what's been made clear to me is that the quarter system, while it has some problems, is beneficial in terms of some of the requirements and things that students can do under the law so that they can actually take a break. It doesn't work when you have something like a semester plan. Then they really are terminating their visa and having to start over again. The schools that have a trimester kind of thing, that works pretty well for them. So either the quarter plan or the trimester allows some flexibility for students without really interrupting their visa. It's the 5 months out, my colleague reminds me. That's the critical part. If you have more than 5 months out of school, you've got to start over again, and that's expensive for students. So I think what we've got right now, it's a lot of work for our office, but we're able to start and stop the visa with the visa sort of fainting instead of dying. We can bring it back to life.
Very nice.
I'm Kathy Welder, and I teach in the chemistry department. Jocelyn was actually one of my students not too long ago. I am a senior lecturer, and I was hired with the understanding that I would be teaching a lecture course in the summer term. It's the Organic Chemistry 2 lecture course. It's a pre-med course. It's a sophomore level course. It's very popular. And I do think that I get it and will be stuck with it forever because no one else wants to teach it. But I do enjoy the teaching aspect of it. It seems to me that we could get rid of we could alter the D plan in a way that helps the students have the flexibility to be here when they want to be here and be off when they want to be off, but help the faculty address some of the concerns that were mentioned earlier with continuity and organizations and things. So I think that if we could create and keep a quarter system in which we do have to create some more courses if we're not going to require the sophomore class to be here in the summer, have to create courses that would be popular so that there are students on campus if that's the desire of the college. But it seems to me that we can keep the flexibility of allowing the students to choose which terms they come. And I see it as they don't have the flexibility because in the D plan they're told you must be here these terms. And then outside of that, you can make some choices.
Christian, there's a hand in the back.
Hi, my name is Emily Fletcher. I'm a 13, and I'm a presidential fellow at the Dartmouth Center for Healthcare Delivery Science. I have a lot of thoughts about the D plan, positive and negative, but a couple of relevant points, I think, to the discussion that's happening now. In terms of study abroad opportunities, my experience was that I applied for Dartmouth programs during my freshman year to go my sophomore year and then got on to none of them. And so I was in a position where I realized that if I wanted to study abroad, that needed to happen my junior year. And so my sophomore year, I was left with an off term that I had to take, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I've talked to a lot of other students who feel like they have to fill this off term and they don't know how to do so. And there's fewer structured programs not during the summer. So like I was taking off my sophomore winter and I didn't know how I was going to find something to do when I was a sophomore with no job experience essentially for anything relevant to my intended major. And then and so I found something luckily that ended up being great. And when I wanted to study abroad during my junior year, there was really no Dartmouth program that fit my needs. So I ended up studying abroad on a semester-long program in the fall, which I think is something that is kind of blasphemy to a lot of people at Dartmouth, that I would choose a program that wasn't run by Dartmouth. But for me, that fit my needs perfectly, and I think it might be a way to encourage more students to be off in the fall, because that's the only time you could do a non-Dartmouth semester-long program. I had to cram it in between sophomore summer and the holidays, but it fit, and I was able to transfer credits, and it worked really well for my needs, and it focused on global health, which is what I'm doing now. And there's no Dartmouth program that focuses on global health. So that was a great experience for me, but there were some challenges posed by the D plan.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you, Emily. Did I sign for those credits? You know, the econ, we'll sign anything.
No, it was Anthro and Asian and Middle Eastern languages and literatures.
Terrific. Yeah, no, that is a suggestion along the lines of what President Hanlon had in mind, which was like, how do we make it easier for sophomores and juniors to find important learning opportunities that take place off campus during the fall in particular? And that's a perfect example. Like, what could we do to better facilitate either internship experiences or transfer programs, or Dartmouth FSPs and LSAs for that matter. So that's really helpful.
Hi, I'm Natalie Hoyt. I'm one of the undergraduate deans working with the first year class for the last couple of years. I want to echo what you just shared about pros and cons of the D plan. One piece that I see, and taking right off of this, is that our first year students are kind of forced into making a decision about their off-campus programs February 1st. And many of them are not ready for many reasons. And some who are ready are making decisions for the wrong reasons. And it's hard to have them plan really for the next year. So I would think that more opportunities to apply for these programs would be important to help with the D plan. Another piece that I think is unmentioned, and it's not the most important thing, but as a staff member here, it's hard to run a school for every term and do all the programming and planning and the organization and the reflection and what's needed to make us all the co-curricular things happen. And we do it, I think, beautifully, considering that we're on all the time. We don't have a D plan. So allowing time for the staff to grow programs, to reflect on programs, to make changes, to have time to just really think about what we've been doing, I think would help in the long run.
Thank you, Natalie. And to that, I think Inga might add that it's also hard for the buildings to work round the clock too, and so there is no, for most of the residential buildings, there is no downtime to fix stuff or to do a full-on renovation. But thank you.
Hello, Steve Silver again, still with Opal. At least I hope I am after my last question. I just have a question, and obviously lots of thoughts going behind that question. This new 6-week interim, why? Why do we have a 6-week interim?
You know, if our committee member Carl Renshaw were here, he could give you probably a 2-week response to the benefits of that. So from the faculty perspective, we're obviously trying to crank on research. We don't want to ignore the students when they're here and when we're very focused on teaching. But boy, you can get a lot done in if you have a 6-week block of time when you can either be out in the field collecting data, or holed up in your office doing analysis. And so I've certainly found it to be beneficial. I also, I'm giving you all my thoughts. Hopefully the audience can jump in too. I always felt bad for students who lived abroad or in California, or even farther away like Cornell or something. You know, to go home for Thanksgiving or not get to go home and then have to come back. And so it seemed like there was a bit of awkwardness there from the student perspective. But anyway, let's hear what other people think.
Can I just add that the reason why I pose that question is because there are a lot of international students, undergrads at least, who are still stuck here. And now, instead of a 4-week interim, they're here for 6 weeks, and they're scattered throughout all of our residence halls, and it's cold and it's lonely. We don't have a full meal plan going for the 6 weeks, although we've certainly worked on some Band-Aids over the last 2 years. But the student body with which I work, the student population with which I work, clearly it's not ideal. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I've observed that. It's a great psych experiment, though, in isolation and dark isolation in dark times. Yeah, so if other folks have...
You can run that one, Bruce.
Okay.
Like Vanna White here.
Scott Drysdale, computer science, chair before he was, a couple before he was. I see advantages of the Dartmouth plan from faculty point of view. My 4th year here, I had 1 term of sabbatical earned. I was able to take off a whole year. I got a term of sabbatical, I got a term of junior faculty fellowship. I taught in the previous summer, I took off the next summer, and fall term, basically. So by teaching in 1 summer, I can then pick a leave term, and in the following year, plus a semester sabbatical term, plus a faculty fellowship term, and then the next summer I took off. So there are advantages in that way. On the other hand, I agree with Tom that I taught summers a lot of times before I had kids. I taught probably more summers than anybody else in the department, I think. But once you have kids and that's their summer vacation, if you're teaching, well, once they're in school, then you no longer have time to go any place with your kids, which is a big sacrifice. So I've seen the same problem that Tom has. It's gotten worse over time, that people really don't want to be teaching in the summer when they have kids, and that's when they can be with their kids. I also saw, as chair, a problem scheduling courses. It's very hard if you have prerequisites to schedule courses with the Dartmouth plan. The difficulty is you can't say, here's course 1, here's course 2, and you'll take them in a sequence. Because half the people will miss course 1, half the people will miss course 2, and if it's something important, you have to offer it at least twice a year because you don't know which terms people will be on. And I see that as a problem with continuity. And I've also seen the stuff Carrie talks about with just student continuity. That students go away, they come back, they're in a different dorm, their friends are off, their boyfriends or girlfriends are off, or their whatever the appropriate term is these days. And people don't see each other for a while, and that can be rough. I've also seen students who have taken very good advantage of the Dartmouth plan. They took off junior spring and the following summer, and they've gone to some place like Microsoft or Apple and had a 6-month internship. Internship, the first month you're learning where the bathroom and copy machine are. The last month you're writing up what you did. If that, for a normal 3-month internship, that leaves you a month in the middle to do stuff. If you can take 6 months, all of a sudden you got 4 times as long in the middle. I guess what I'm saying is I'm torn about it. I see advantages, I see drawbacks, but on the whole, I see more drawbacks than advantages these days.
Gary Heckman again. I think I'm still in the class of 76. Just 2 quick items, some of you maybe think about. One is the especially what Scott was just saying. One thing the Dartmouth plan does is creates this quarter mentality that I think traps us. We go in this very jerky 9-week, 10-week spurt, and then everything starts all over again at the next quarter. We have such little continuity in the group. You're always resetting when it comes to committees, either faculty committees or student committees. Everything is just on this herky-jerky 4 times a year, start and stop kind of mode. We can't get any kind of momentum going on much of anything. Again, I guess problem is that I'm more of a communitarian. I think more about the group. And all the advantages people are talking about, if you think about them, as I said before, they're me advantages. But they don't talk about what the effect is on the group, on the community. And I thought that was the one thing that President Hanlon was identifying as being a problem, is that we're not working well as a group, or at least not as well as we could or should. Another thing I think is a real challenge for your committee is the opportunity cost question. So one is what could we be doing otherwise if we didn't have this thing? And I think there are maybe some room for things in the middle, at least as a transition. During the Student Life Initiative, a number of people proposed moving to a 1-year flexibility as opposed to a 2-year flexibility. So you tighten it up. It's already been tightened once, by the way. If you think that this is the Dartmouth plan, no, this is version 2.0. There could be a version 3.0. 2.0 required the sophomore summer as opposed to any summer. What is it? When it was given to us, we were told they were like, because county like to compute these things, there were like 4 million different possibilities. Of course, 3,999,125 were not really practical, but like going to school the entire time or never going to school until your senior year or something. But that, it didn't matter. He liked the big number, so that was cool. But they then, later in the 80s, they tightened it to require the freshman year and the sophomore year, and then the senior year and sophomore summer. And we could tighten it again and take 1 year out of that equation and make only 1 year, and that would be be better. It's still maybe a bit of a compromise. I still think ultimately you'll come to the conclusion you don't do it. The other opportunity cost is that no one in this room is a student who didn't come to Dartmouth because of the Dartmouth plan. We don't know. They're probably at Princeton, but we don't know who they are. And so there are people who don't like it, who literally don't come here because of it, as well as people who came here because of it. And we should think about that part of the equation as well, I think. In any event, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, Christian, there's a hand in the back. And maybe after that, Maria, I don't know if you have any comments on how the D plan affects our marketability, or what your research shows, or what your thoughts are. But we'll hear from this.
So I'm Amelia Rather. I am a 13, and I'm also a presidential fellow working in the office of the provost. And I just have 2 quick things to say. The first is that, so the longer interim during winter term started our senior year. And because it was the first year that it had happened, none of us really had that much of an opportunity to think about, okay, what am I going to spend this time doing? So going forward, I've been thinking a lot about what kinds of opportunities might be presented by having this long extended term. For example, doing some sort of a course either at Dartmouth or abroad or in the field that then allows for if you teach a course on entrepreneurship and then spend a couple weeks working with a company in a structured internships or whatever that are placed through the college, or doing some sort of an abroad program that involved more than just one location that you can't really fit into an 8 or 9 week term. So that's my first thought. But if from the perspective of the faculty, you want those weeks to allow for more research, I think that that's a trade-off that you have to make. Because it's going to require more from the faculty as well if you want to increase the programming to make that worthwhile for students. The second thing that I have to say is that I think not only is the D plan, I love the D plan, but on the other hand, I think it's important to recognize it's not just disruptive for student and student relationships, but also student and faculty relationships. It was really, really difficult for me to make any sort of meaningful, long-standing relationships with faculty because each of our classes were 9 or 10 weeks, and you don't really even start to get to know a professor at the end of 10 weeks. And so many professors, who knows? One of my favorite professors I had in a class freshman year, and I was really hoping to get close with him, and we were not on a single term at the same time at all. So I think it's just important to keep that in mind as well, that faculty-student relationships, I think, are damaged by the structure.
So I'm Maria Lascaris. I'm Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid, and on the D-Plan committee with Bruce and Christian and some others in this room. And so the question came up just now in terms of, so how does the D-Plan play in prospective student land? And I think, I think from the research that we've done, it is one of our most distinctive features. the calendar system, whether it's a calendar system or a way of life or a facilitator for off-campus and internship experiences. It is something I think that does distinguish us from our peer institutions. I think what we're seeing more and more, however, is that many other schools now are providing their students with maybe not quite as many, but certainly a significant number of opportunities to go abroad or to do internships. So there are other ways that you can include the internship opportunity, the off-campus study or semester abroad kind of experience in a traditional 2-semester calendar or 3-trimester calendar. One of the things that I think I'm more interested in, if we think about how we use the summer term, whether or not we have a traditional D plan as we know it today or it evolves into a different format, is to think about the possibility of doing some additional programming for high school students on our campus. Many of our peers have a significant investment of summer academic programs. So we have a lot of athletic programs for high school or middle school or even younger kids on our campus. But I think we're really missing an opportunity to really highlight all that Dartmouth offers by not having a little more robust academic programming for prospective students on our campus in the summer.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly Seplicus. I'm a 13. I'm another fellow in the president's office, and I'm also staffing the D plan committee that Bruce is the chair of. And I just had a couple of thoughts about the sophomore summer. It was my favorite term at Dartmouth, and in large part because it was one of the most formative experiences that I had both as a student and as a person. Because when the rest of the school leaves, sophomores are left to assume leadership roles on campus, and it's a time to really reevaluate what are the academics that I want to pursue, what are the extracurriculars that I want to pursue, and what are the relationships that really mean the most to me here at Dartmouth. And so I think that kind of speaks to the maybe selfish mentality that you were referring to before, because it was really introspective. But at the same time, I really think that term gave me a lot of confidence once I had decided what I wanted to do and how I wanted the rest of my college experience to look, to go on and make really meaningful contributions to groups, which is an environment in which I feel like I really thrive. And so I really like to think that term, formed me and my peers in a way that enabled us to be more meaningful contributors and leaders later on at Dartmouth. So I'm not saying that the summer term is the only way to do that, but if, we move forward with whether or not to keep it, always trying to preserve an experience that really challenges students to look at themselves and to go on to make more meaningful contributions. So some sort of class bonding, and I don't know if that can be achieved through a course or other program, but keeping that in mind.
Hi, my name is Celia Chen, and I'm in the class of 78, and I've experienced the D plan as a student many years ago, but I also have had the privilege of being able to teach here in the biology department. And one of the things that I have felt, as a student, I felt that it was great to have those off terms and get to do those internships, things that other people weren't competing with me for. But I have felt teaching in the 10-week interval is just a race to the finish. And what I feel is that because we're racing to finish an entire course in 10 weeks, we also we don't get a chance to really sort of think about things as well, but we also don't allow the students to really think deeply about what they're learning. And I guess I have never taught in a semester system, so I don't know what that's like. My own daughter went to a college that is in a semester, that does have semesters, and it felt to me from afar like she had more time to sit with the material. And I have been worried about that ever since I had the chance to start teaching in this 10-week kind of plan. And I am also an alum who is worried about the connectedness of the community that Steve had just mentioned before. I have been really worried about the percentage of students that feel the need to join the Greek system. I'm not saying we shouldn't have it. It was, you know, a big force when we were here as students, but I feel now it looks like that's all we have for social option for students. And I actually, with a couple of my alumni friends, have felt that we couldn't say to our family and friends whose children were applying here that we felt it would be a good place for them. And that made me feel really terrible. And so I guess I just wanted to give that perspective. Those things have been mentioned, but anyway, that's just my thought on it.
Now, I'm wondering if anyone, assuming for the moment that there is a drive to draw students into the winter term, or maybe some additional non-sophomores into the summer, does anyone have any suggestions on what would be the best incentives that might create that draw? You know, some of the things that we what's that, Tom?
Reduce tuition those terms.
Well, yeah, I know. I was afraid this has obviously come up, and there are these fairness concerns. You're a philosopher, so there might be. You know, so there may be that may be a perfectly sensible thing to do, or it may be an important thing to do. It's not obvious. You know, that might create further, you know, income segregation or class. You just don't know, right? Of course, maybe the students who are on full financial aid, they'll be immune to it, perhaps, and so then there might be some students in the middle for whom it's a big factor, and you know, I don't know. So that's this is something that we've bandied about a bit, but it's not quite as obvious as trying to sell more, you know, a certain kind of razor or shaving cream or something on your Amazon site. But no, that's certainly a possibility.
So if we're trying to drive more students into certain terms, there are a couple of things. I think we have a group of students who are on the pre-health track and the engineering track who are aggressively trying to accomplish some prereqs and classes. A lot of students will try to do the summer Orgo program at Harvard, which is there's no better, it's not a better program by any means. It's just get it done. So creating opportunities like that where students can take Pub Policy 5 and Gov 10 at the same time and be competitive for a certain thing, you know, really drive students to want to take two classes at once that pair up beautifully, or hit out Orgo 1 and 2 at the same time, or, you know, whatever other curricular things that students tend to spread over 2 or 3 terms.
Hi, I'm Bob Sepulchus. No relation to Holly. It's just a very common name. I'm a proud classmate of Celia's and been an administrator at Dartmouth for many years. And I just wanted to comment on one aspect of this, and that is that when I finished freshman year and returned to campus for sophomore year, in those days, there was no first-year housing. There were members of all 4 classes were in each dorm, and anytime you wanted to return to campus to the same residence hall, you could. And I just remember that a very important part of my feeling comfortable and like I really belonged and like I was really hitting the ground running sophomore year was I was returning to, it happened to be Russell Sage at the time, but I had that nucleus of friends and acquaintances, and it really helped me get off to a real good start that year. I talked to some students nowadays, and I certainly can't claim any kind of scientific survey, but I do know that I hear anecdotally from some students who find that coming back for sophomore year is sometimes the most unnerving, disruptive time of their whole experience, because they very often wind up in a different residence hall with hardly anybody that they know. And even though, sure, you can always make new friends and all, I think the disruptive part is that feel of loss for those friendships that you spent your freshman year developing. And suddenly they've all headed off in different directions because of the the particular way that our residential system works now. So just something I think to be kept in mind when exploring different possibilities.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And I would add to that, you know, we have the opportunity in creating that continuity for it to be an option, the way Bob just described, not necessarily an assignment. Like if you're at Harvard or Yale, you get a house stamped on your forehead, or the Sorting Hat puts you into a house, and then that's it, and there ain't no change. So I love the idea that there's a lot of mixing, or at least that we encourage mixing among a given undergraduate cohort, but also to maybe give the students the option to return to a house if that's what they want to do, or a cluster. So.
Hi, I'm Iris Yu. I'm 14 and very nervous. Sorry. I just had a couple of points. Talking about the winter term earlier, I know a lot of people feel pressure now because of this long 6-week break to try and do something meaningful, and for some people that means trying to find like an internship within 4 months of, 4 weeks, and I think that creates an additional amount of pressure. If, per se, there was a fall FSP or something where they could extend that more into that 6-week period, I think that would definitely help to draw interest into such a program. Additionally, if you change around prerequisites a little bit to make the more mandatory introductory courses offered in the winter, I know I was stuck on for 4 winters, not happy about that, but that's when my courses were offered, and so I was, willing to make that trade-off. And at the same time, the flexibility to be able to take a spring and a summer and get that really long internship was definitely very helpful. Was able to actually do work. I think there are definitely some drawbacks in terms of social life when it comes to, the trade-off. People are on different terms and off different terms, but it's also possible to kind of embrace that flexibility. I know I definitely did not want to live in the same dorm or same cluster for 4 years. I've enjoyed moving 4 times, and there's a different life to each group of people that you're meeting. And sometimes you just realize, all your classes are in one area. Why not live closer to there? It saves you 10 minutes walk every morning. I think some of us are willing to make that trade-off. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jay Webster. I'm also a 13 and the 4th presidential fellow to speak today. I work in the Office of Advancement, but I'm going to speak about my experience as a student. I would say that the single factor that drove my D-plan decisions the most, and maybe faculty don't want to hear this, is leadership roles in campus organizations. For those of you who don't know, most organizations do leadership transitions junior spring, but the one organization, to my knowledge, that is an exception to that is the D, which is what I spent most of my time doing, and that was a leadership transition junior winter. And so I was supposed to be off my junior winter, but I got a role on the D that required me to be on for my entire junior year, and so I changed my D plan because of that. So that's just maybe something to think about in terms of how to incentivize people to stay on for terms that are considered less popular, namely the winter. Maybe trying to encourage organizations to do leadership transitions earlier, which might have more students stay on campus in a term that is typically bereft of students.
Jocelyn again. I probably have one of the most unique D plans at Dartmouth because I'm in the 5-year enrollment plan, which means that I have 4 extra leave terms, and during those times I've been able to do internships and research, etc. abroad. And so I'm thinking that maybe if Dartmouth does decide to get rid of the D plan and have a semester system, then perhaps by allowing students to do a 5-year plan so that they have an extra year where they could take off maybe the first semester or the second semester and do those internships abroad during the winter or during the fall when they're not competing with other campuses. That could be an option. I know that there are obviously logistical and administrative challenges to that, but it might be a little bit less or easier to manage than the D plan.
Excellent. Well, we'll let Scott have the last comment here. No.
Not a very good one, but we'll see.
Don't sell yourself short.
I'd just like to reinforce a point that Carrie made, that there's a big difference between the D plan and the quarter system. My undergraduate college, Knox, was on the quarter system. My graduate school, Stanford, was on the quarter system. The D plan is not the quarter system. It's the idea you're on sophomore summer and you take some time off during junior or sophomore year. And you can do that with a quarter system. We looked at doing it with a semester system. There was a big debate. And basically the reason it got defeated was that doing the D plan with a semester system really destroys prerequisites. And the other was, I think the deciding thing was the language people. The people who taught languages realizing that it's much easier to take off a 12th of your education and go abroad than an 1/8 of your education and go abroad. And that it meant that people in engineering, sometimes pre-med, felt they couldn't do a broad program. They didn't have the number of courses and they couldn't, and it fit in the wrong place in their thing. So I just hope that we'll remember what Carrie said. There's two different debates here. There's quarters versus semesters, and there's whichever you choose, saying you have to be on in the summer and you have to take off sometime junior or sophomore year. And if we don't keep that straight, we're going to be talking past each other.
Nice. Well, thank you all for giving up your lunch hour and coming out. One thing I forgot to mention is that we've obviously recorded all your comments, but also we need not attach your names to them. But what I wanted to say was that in addition to that, we're going to post on the improved Dartmouth site, and I think it's called Dartmouth Discussions. Holly, is that, did I call it right or no? Moving Dartmouth Forward, much better name. See, that has a lot more impact than what I thought it was called. So there'll be opportunities if you have additional thoughts to post those, and that'll all be incorporated in our work. So thanks again. Nice. Thanks, Christine. Great. Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's good.